IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I am Kingshuk Saha, a researcher at the Takshashila Institution. With me are my colleague Aditya Ramanathan, who is a research fellow, and Bharat Sharma, who is an analyst at Takshashila Institution. Today we'll discuss Israel-Hamas crisis that has engulfed the whole Middle East. And particularly today we'll discuss how it affects India and what are India's response to these emerging challenges. Hello, Aditya and Bharat. It's great to have you in All Things Policy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Kingshuk. I think it's very interesting to, discuss this war because, for me, it's interesting because 10 days just before the conflict, the National Security Advisor to President Biden, Jake Sullivan, said that the Middle East has never been this peaceful. So, what happened? There are so many questions, I think, that are jumping out. Really excited to be on the podcast. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you are welcome. So, firstly, Prime Minister Narendra Modi immediately expressed, solidarity with the Israel after that terrible Hamas attack. He tweeted, "Deeply shocked by the news of terrorists attacking Israel. Our thought and prayers are with innocent victims and their family. We stand in solidarity with Israel in this difficult hour." So, Aditya, how you see this shift in Israel position? Normally, it was a historical position that India has taken toward Palestine. Israel, when you used to talk, it was muchly hushed about. But now it seems like there's a strategic embrace for Israel. So, how you see this?
Thanks, Kingshuk. I'm not sure that there is actually a major departure. I think there are two aspects of Indian foreign policy that are involved here. One is India's policy towards terrorism, and the other is India's policy in what the MEA calls West Asia, and the subset of that being Israel and Palestine. Now, what the Prime Minister's initial tweet said was, like you said, we stand in solidarity with Israel at this difficult hour. And it did not mention anything else about the Palestinian problem or issue, anything like that. Now, I think it's easy to misinterpret this as India taking sides, but it's actually just fairly consistent with India's position on terrorism for really a quarter century or so, certainly since 9/11. What India has sought to do is actually delegitimize terrorism as a form of as any form of behavior and certainly as a tool of statecraft. And in that sense, it's completely consistent with that. And one of the things India tries to do here is separate acts of terrorism from any issues they might be connected with. And I think at that moment, that tweet was exactly the right thing to do. It was to simply refer to the terrorist attacks, say you are shocked by them, and to say that you stand in solidarity with those who have been the victims. Now, the other thing that this allows you to do is it gives you diplomatic space to reassert India's position on issues in Palestine and Israel, which is that India continues to support a two-state solution. India does continue to have a relationship with the Palestinian Authority. In fact, there was a call between the Indian Prime Minister and Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, on October 19th, if I'm not mistaken. We are recording this. Yeah, we are recording this on the 20th of October in the afternoon. And obviously, this is a fast-moving situation. Bharat referred to it. How things can change so quickly. So, by the time this comes out, some things may have changed on the ground, but hopefully, most of what we try and analyze here will hold. And I think, in terms of Indian foreign policy, I see a lot more consistency than difference. It's really a gradual evolution of Indian foreign policy. India established ambassadorial level relationship with Israel in 1992, and that relationship has grown since then very significantly. There is a major technology relationship, and there's of course defense ties between India and Israel. That makes Israel one of India's most important partners in West Asia, besides some Gulf Arab countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And but India is not going to allow any one country in that region to dictate its policy towards that entire region, right? So obviously, West Asia is very important to India. It's source of energy. We have something like 9 million Indians living there, and of course, it's a massive part of the littoral of the Western Indian Ocean region. And so, India is not going to let it's Israel, the Israel-Palestine issue hijack its broader relationship with the region. And I think that's been quite consistent. I mean, you had Modi's statement on terrorism on the 7th. Then I think it was on the 10th. Yes, on the 10th that he spoke with Netanyahu. We've had since then statements from the MEA spokesperson about India's consistent stand on Palestine and the support for a two-state solution. On 18th of October, again, the Prime Minister's Twitter handle had this tweet about him being deeply shocked about the loss of lives at Al-Ahli Hospital in Gaza. And what's interesting is that the tweet also adds that civilian casualties in the ongoing conflict are a matter of serious and continuing concern, and B, that those involved should be held. Now, as of this recording, it does seem like the attack did not come from IDF. That can change, but it seems like it did not come from the IDF. So, those involved should be held responsible. Can be significant that way. But also, I will say that he's pointing out that civilian casualties are a matter of serious concern. So, no matter who is responsible for that particular attack on the hospital, India is expressing its concern about civilian casualties in Gaza as the IDF continues to target Hamas there.
Like what you said, I will just summarize and few key points. Maybe like number of analysts and all, they said that India is now supporting Israel, but the way you have said that it is not the thing. Like even from 1947, Indian stand had been very clear. India was, I think, one of the few states that had objected in United Nations against the division of the Palestine between two state Arabs and Israel. They wanted a one state. And moving forward, as you have rightly pointed out, one of the major issues for India that had long been ignored by West was that India has been a victim of terrorism. So here, as the saying goes, the wearer no very shoe wears pinch. So maybe I think that was the first reaction, like as the attack, the news of attack was coming. I think that was the immediate reaction by the Prime Minister. Maybe after 2 days, there was a statement by the Foreign Ministry that India respect and stand for the two state. And as you have said, like yesterday, there was a talk between Indian Prime Minister and the Palestinian Authority President. So India also give aid to the Palestinian Authority, like around 5 million aid, and they said that they will continue with that aid, and all the humanitarian assistance would be given by India. So yeah, I think India's stand has been pragmatic, but as you have rightly pointed out, the situation is very dynamic and fluid. And on top of that, as you said about the hospital attack, firstly it was said it was done by IDF. Then it was said Hamas did it. Then another report came, it was by Islamic Jihad. So each one is coming with their own version. So it will take some time, for us to even understand what is happening. On this, Bharat, would you like to add something?
So I think just this comment that Aditya made about there being consistency in Indian foreign policy on what's happening, in the Middle East, and especially on between Israel and Palestine and Israel and Hamas as well. But I think so just wanted to bring this to everyone's notice that when Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Arindam Bakshi was taking questions about which side does India kind of fall on? I mean, is there's really two sides? And he said, and I'm going to quote him: India has always advocated the resumption of direct negotiations towards establishing a sovereign, independent, and viable state of Palestine, living within secure and recognized borders, side by side at peace with Israel. I mean, so there's so much discourse that kind of emphasizes India's support, towards Israel, not Palestine. But I think that's the MEA has said that that's not true. I mean, it's possible to criticize the terrorist attack, that quote unquote terrorist attack against Israel, and kind of be consistent with the kind of policy orientation that India has had until now. Yeah.
I think somewhere along the answer, there's a consensus. India's had been more, pragmatic rather than being dogmatic. And given the fluid situation, I think this is the way forward. So moving forward, like as as Israel is preparing to invade Gaza, so like Aditya, do you think Hezbollah will open another front in its northern border? And it will escalate the conflict that will take the whole region. Like while you were answering the first question I had asked you, so you said when you talk about that region, that is West Asia or Middle East, like there are around 9 million Indian expat living there and working. And also oil, the energy import from that region has fallen a bit, but still it is significantly around 45%. That region supply so 45% of our energy need, despite like recent spike from Russian oil. So how do you see like the challenge that if the conflict in takes the whole region, and how India will react in that scenario?
Yeah, as far as whether Hezbollah will attack, I'll need to call Hassan Nasrallah and ask him what he plans to do, what his plans over the week are. But really, we don't know. And obviously, if the IDF is heavily engaged, ground forces are heavily engaged in Gaza, there is an incentive, or at least a temptation, for Hezbollah to make life difficult for Israel in the north while that's going on. Now, obviously, there are ways that you can deter that. Israel can use standoff munitions or air power to target Hezbollah positions in South Lebanon. The US has also sent a sizable fleet there. So all of these things can act as a deterrent to Hezbollah. Now, as far as the wider region is concerned, unless Iran is significantly involved in some way in this conflict, I don't think it necessarily starts letting the alarm bells ring in India. You had mentioned Russia. Obviously, Russia. There's been this spike in oil purchases from Russia, but that's more ephemeral. It's not a sustainable thing. So India's two other biggest oil suppliers are Saudi Arabia and Iraq. With those two, really vying for the top position, or right now the second position. And a lot of that oil, especially from Iraq, comes through the Strait of Hormuz. And the country over here that has the greatest incentive to block the Strait of Hormuz is Iran. So something like a fifth of the whole world's oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz. And so at the worst case scenario, you can see some sort of blockage there. And, essentially because it's littoral waters, you can use mines, you can use anti-ship cruise missiles that are based on land, you can use surface to air missiles, air defenses, basically to protect those assets. If you're Iran, you can make life difficult for other countries to operate there. You can drive up insurance rates. If you recall, in 2019, there was a series of limpet mine attacks on tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. These were never very clearly attributed to Iran, but a lot of people suspect the IRGC, these Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, was actually involved. These were very measured attacks because they used these limpet mines over the waterline so that ships wouldn't capsize and so on. But obviously, they were meant to send a message and to drive up insurance rates. You might see something like that, but if you are Iran, you want to calibrate this very carefully because there are other countries, for example, China, that buy your oil. So you don't want to antagonize them necessarily. So, if you're Iran, yes, you have this as an option, but you have to exercise it carefully. As far as Indian citizens in the region are concerned, look, Indian foreign policy has always been dictated by the fact that we have this massive expat population. And the last few times there have been these major crises, the Iran-Iraq war from 1980 to 1990, the Second Gulf War, August 1990 to March 1991, which also, by the way, involved a massive evacuation of Indians from Kuwait. In all of these cases, India has had to be very measured in its statements and very measured in its actions. And, that is something that will continue. That doesn't change. But I'm sure that people in Delhi are already thinking about contingency plans, or at least dusting off old contingency plans for evacuation of Indian citizens. Now, you have something like 8.9 million or 9 million Indian expats living in just the Gulf region. And you have, I think, about 3.5 million of them are in the UAE, which is the biggest population. So, this is not a minor thing for India, and Indian policy towards the region is going to be driven by that. The fact that you have something like 3.5 million in UAE, and I think another 3 million in Saudi Arabia, and these also happen to be your most important partners in the region, other than Israel, will mean that Indian foreign policy there will be driven by these concerns.
Yeah, and just to also add, Hezbollah is Iran backed. I mean, militarily, politically. So I think, since you mentioned, Hezbollah's role in the conflict itself, I mean, it's determined by kind of Iran's own policy to some extent. I mean, and Hezbollah plays an important role in Lebanese politics. And since the conflict has emerged, on October 7th, Hezbollah and Israel kind of exchanged cross-border fire many times. On October 10th, we saw cross-border infiltrations, between Israel and Hezbollah. So, I mean, yeah, I think they have been engaging in skirmishes for many years in the past. So I think, the conflict between Israel and Hamas risks, just triggering that particular conflict itself. Yeah.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
From this, I'm tempted to ask, everyone know Hezbollah is Iran's proxy. Without their backing, they won't be doing much. And even that matter, even Hamas is getting sizable both material and arms from Iran. So why there is not a international consent to stop Iran from doing this? It seems very naive question. I understand, given the geopolitics, but I think that would be one of the easier way rather than telling that it's no Hezbollah or Hamas. Because if you look at the demography of the region and the challenge that it faces, for which be it Hamas fighting or Hezbollah fighting, it's not the issue of people. They have ample amount of foot soldier. You can kill, but it's about the funding, it's about the arms and the legitimacy that they get by some of these countries. So, I'm just tempted to know, what are your views on that? I don't think there would be anything other than views. So,
Iran has been isolated. That's the truth. So it's been isolated for many years. And after the US withdrew from the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, it's actually ended up tightening the screws on Iran once again. And, obviously Iran, it now has more access to foreign currency and so on. So it's been able to build its reserves. So that's there. But it's still a fairly isolated country. The only reason it's not being isolated more is other Gulf countries don't want to provoke Iran into carrying out direct action against them. That's one thing. They don't like Iran, but they don't want to push it into a corner. The other thing is, of course, other countries have their own equities there. Iran is a country that has major oil reserves. For India, Iran is that country that borders both Pakistan and Afghanistan. It's your direct land route into Afghanistan. And, it's alwaand useful to be friends with Pakistan's other neighbors. So, all of these reasons, do restrain countries in the extent to which they will go to isolate Iran. Having said that, I wouldn't want to be in charge of Iran's economy today. It's isolated. There are very few sources of growth, and a lot of this is really down to foreign policy choices made by Iran's ruling elite.
Bharat, would you like to add something?
No, I think that's. I agree with Aditya. Yeah,
I totally agree. Aditya, I would like to add one point. When you said you don't want to be you said foreign minister or economic affairs minister. I didn't get it. Sorry.
In charge of its economy, yeah.
So other way, if you just see Iran, the country is blessed with such a natural resources, and even if you look at the human resources, they are one of the best. If you look at the education system, people Iranian people are very good in science and mathematics. As you rightly pointed out, unfortunately, the political regime had pushed the country in a corner. So it would have been obviously, if the political regime was changed, I think you would have liked to be in charge of the economy, given the natural resources and the human resources. So moving forward, like the next thing I would like to ask, China and in this whole issue, like where now, if you see from a larger perspective, China and Russia have hardened their position toward the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Chinese foreign minister said that Israel bombing campaign had gone beyond the scope of self-defense. And Russian President Vladimir Putin compared it to the siege of Gaza with the Leningrad by German during Second World War, something that is in very bad taste, especially for the Israelis. And while on the other hand, we see US President and British Prime Minister visiting Israel in solidarity. So do you think like there's this geopolitical divergence widening between the major power and maybe like India will be forced to take a side in this?
I think India may not be forced to take a side. I mean, just going back 50 years to the war of 1973, and 1973 is not a great analogy, but you talked about geopolitical divisions. And 1973, despite the Cold War detente and everything, the Americans and the Soviets were on two opposite sides, of this conflict. The Soviets were directly supplying both the Egyptians and the Syrians who had initiated that war. And the Americans were in turn supplying the Israelis, and in fact had to continue supplying them during that war. And, there was potentially a nuclear alert, and all of those things happened. High stakes diplomacy. I don't see this situation being as tense. Just because the Chinese are expressing support for Palestine, it doesn't mean they are going to match their words with actions. We're not going to see arms supplies to any party over here, or even any other kind of substantial aid. So, this is as of now just rhetorical. The risk may arise, like you said, Kingshuk, if this war if turns into a larger conflagration, then things can get ugly. But right now, I wouldn't worry that much. If you're China, you also don't want the region to go up in flames. You want that to continue being a reliable source of energy for you. It's hard if you're China to project power that far. So all of those reasons make it not in China's interest to see this escalate. China can provide rhetorical support, but it would like this conflict to go away as fast as possible.
So, Bharat, would you like to add your thought on this?
No, I mean, I think just one thought was that I think it. I mean, I believe that India so far. I mean, as we spoke about earlier, India hasn't taken sides. I mean, it's not. I don't think that condemning the terrorist attack means that you side with Israel. I mean, we've said that diplomatically that. And then by siding with Israel, it does not mean that you automatically are against Palestine. I think it's Hamas that. I think it's the focus on terrorism itself, as Aditya mentioned earlier. That's been India's focus. So I don't think that there is. I mean, it's not a very kind of neat division where you say, oh, which side do you fall on? So I don't think so. I mean, and that being said, I think if it does get ugly, if some things do happen, then yeah, unfortunately, you have to kind of take sides that don't necessarily reflect, your thinking about foreign policy towards that region. Yeah.
Yeah. Good point, Bharat. I mean, I just add that, if we conflate this terrorist attack with the Palestinian cause, we're not doing the Palestinian cause any good, right? So it makes sense to actually, for example, put out a tweet that doesn't mention the Palestinian cause and then condemns terrorism. And then also separately say that India continues to support the two-state solution. I mean, by conflating the two, we are actually helping to set back the Palestinian cause. So it makes sense absolutely not to do that. Second thing is, Hamas itself has been in the past fairly careful about who it targets. While it has ended up, for example, targeting American citizens who are in Israel and so on, it's been careful generally about killing non-Israelis. This attack, we see no such restraint. And Hamas is essentially doing its best to isolate itself from the rest of the world with this attack. It's hard to see a lot of governments having sympathy with it.
But Aditya, do you see any? I mean, what kind of thinking goes into such? I mean, so there was a music festival happening. I think it had American citizens in it. They were massacred. So I think, as you say, I mean, it wasn't a very calculated attack in the sense that you target who to kill. I mean, within civilians itself, you're very clear that these are Israelis and these are non-Israelis. And that I don't think that Hamas was unaware about the attack that is the counter attack that Israel would kind of pose. So I don't know. I mean, it just seems like unplanned. It just seems like something that came out of the blue, even for them. I mean, I'm sure that's not the case. But I think in terms of their policy, in terms of how it would affect their standing in the Middle East, it just seems like a very like a surprise attack or something that is unplanned.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I'll add to that. Normally, there is like always like argument or fight between people saying one person freedom fighter is another person terrorist. But as you pointed out, like by this very deed, Hamas, I think they have lost that both, I think, legal or even moral authority to say this. Even as Bharat pointed out, like some people were in a music festival, people were at home. And another thing, I think that around people from 30 countries have died, and around this many number of people are hostage. Like someone who is from Thailand or Nepal has nothing to do with this conflict. People of these countries have died. People from Chile has died, like from one end of the globe to another end of the globe. People, I don't think were even remotely concerned where Palestine or Israel exists. Now they know because something to their village or town, this had been brought with one of their loved one being killed. So that is, I think, but maybe like Bharat, you said Hamas like was didn't plan. I think that maybe they planned it deeply. Uh, they wanted this sort of reaction, but sometimes what happens though when it can't be in a controlled reaction. Something it goes out of your hand. It's more like the Frankenstein monster. Like so, they wanted to impact Israel, but in that way they have done more than they could.
But I do think that if you invade Israel in the way you've tortured civilians, you've taken them hostage. You are aware of Israel's military power. You're aware of the relationship it has with the US. I don't think doing such an attack was being negligent on the consequences. So I think they were aware of what reaction the world would have. It will mean that I think Hamas will get isolated. I think the question I was posing was why. I mean, what amounts. What happens with the attack that what was the thinking behind the attack itself? Yeah.
What the thinking behind the attack is? Yeah, it's necessarily speculative, but obviously the first cause that people attributed was you want to scuttle normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Any party that's being left out in any such settlement knows that its own negotiating leverage is going to go down when others make their own separate peace. And so, if you are from Gaza, you have reason to believe that, your ability to influence events and to get a fair deal are going to go down if there's a Saudi Israel rapprochement. But there may be more regionally proximate causes. It may be just about local politics. It may be about Hamas really being in competition with the Palestinian Authority for the support of Palestinians. Not just in Gaza but in the West Bank. It may also be about simply managing the rage in that exists in the West Bank and channeling it towards Israelis and other civilians. It may also simply be about trying to disrupt, seeing the chaos in Israel, the disruption within Israel, and making a miscalculation and thinking this is a moment of weakness. We can take advantage of the Israelis. So all of these possibilities exist right now, but I think we'll have to wait a bit for people who have specific expertise in Palestinian politics to come back and tell us, give us more insights into this.
Yeah, and also I think, I mean, we can kind of agree that this was an unprecedented attack. I mean, you've never had, I mean, at least Hamas target Israeli civilians in the way in which they have in the past few weeks. I mean, in the war that happened in 1973, that, I mean, it was government to government, or sorry, military to military. I mean, civilians were not involved directly in the sense that you take them hostage, you do all sorts of things. So in that sense, I mean, the attack itself and kind of standing up for wanting leverage in a particular situation, even for that, I think it's unprecedented. Yeah.
I mean, to be clear, Hamas has attacked Israeli civilians for decades. It's launched massive bombing campaigns, raids into Israel, and so on. But yeah, I think you're right in the sense of Hamas has reason to take hostages because it does want to negotiate the release of Hamas prisoners. So that is one incentive that they do have.
So going forward, like we are talking about the countries, like what is India's reaction, or for that matter, how the West stand with like UK or US. So like in this present hour, like post 1947, like international order, one of the important organ is that United Nation. And I don't think United Nation has crowned itself in glory, but despite that, like it has a role to play. So, as we are talking international crisis, we have to talk about its role. So, it's the UN Security Council first intervention on Israel crisis was a resolution by its council's 15 member for the humanitarian pause for the delivery of life-saving aid to Gaza. But unfortunately, it was vetoed by United States and interestingly abstained by UK and Russia. So moving forward, Bharat, how you see UN Security Council role in de-escalating the situation?
I mean, yeah, I think the United Nations and the UNSC is meant to establish world peace, a forum where, powers can come, countries can come, talk to each other about issues, negotiate and so on. But what's happening, I mean, the UNSC and the UN is not heaven in any sense, right? I mean, the issues you have with other countries persist, right? So there were two resolutions there was one resolution this week, there was one resolution last week regarding the humanitarian ceasefire that you mentioned. I mean, so I think Russia led the first resolution for the ceasefire, saying that there has to be a ceasefire and there has to be a stoppage to conflict because for release of hostages, humanitarian aid access, and the safe evacuation of civilians. But it did not mention Hamas by name. It condemned terrorism, but it did not kind of mention Hamas by name, so it lost. It wasn't adopted. Brazil earlier this week kind of led a similar kind of draft, but this time the draft mentions Hamas by name, but it still did not get adopted because the US vetoed the resolution, saying that the draft itself does not mention Israel's right to self-defense. So, I mean, I just want to say that, like the issues that you have and the positions you take with regard to, issues like the Israel-Hamas kind of conflict, they persist in the UN. They persist in the UNSC. I mean, it's not something that peace kind of magically erupts in these situations. So I think what's happening at the UNSC kind of just reflects the state of the state. That's very natural. I mean, that's the ground kind of situation. So I mean, you see China, Russia voting in the way you would expect them. You see the US voting in the way that you expect them. Yeah. So I think, I don't know. I mean, until and unless at the ground situation, there's a difference in your policy or position towards the Middle East or Israel or these key actors, you wouldn't see a difference. You wouldn't see any resolution at the UNSC. I mean, I don't see how that would happen. Yeah.
So Aditya, would you like to add something to that?
No, I think Bharat has covered it. We are likely to see UN dysfunction in this crisis, unfortunately.
So main thing, like as Bharat, you said, is not about this crisis. I think it is the existing setup, like how UN works. I think that is the main cause for it. Like in the resolution, you
I
refer
think
to the first resolution, Hamas was not mentioned. In the second resolution, Hamas was mentioned. But when they're discussing, like neither of the parties are present in this. And I think in this 15 member of UN Council, there was only one Arab country, that is United Arab Emirates. And they strongly criticize Hamas for starting this. But that is different story, as the UAE people like to state that, we don't like to mix business with politics. So this is far more layered and deep. So hopefully, like, as still it is a fluid and developing situation. Hopefully, like, only we can hope that it will, like, end and there will be peace. So
yeah, and then just to also mention that listeners will listen to the podcast near the end of next week, so I'm sure there'll be lots of developments until then. But since you mentioned dysfunction in the UN, I think it's a good time for global South countries to say what they're already saying about reforming the multilateral systems, because as you said, I think in some sense I think it's dysfunction. It does not work to kind of do what it should, which is negotiate peace in times of crisis.
thank you so much, Aditya and Bharat, for your insight, and with this we'll end today's podcast. Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.